Let me show you how to use antistatic.exchange, a new forecasting platform. In the second part of the video, I'll explain why it is the way it is. Let's start off with the simpler markets, and then we'll move on to more complicated ones. We have the market on the date that China takes major military action against Taiwan. What counts as major military action? Well, like every good forecasting question, there's a resolution criteria, which you can read here, but we won't go too into the weeds for the demonstration. The other thing you'll notice is that there are already all these probabilities here, and that's because all the markets come with starting probabilities, and they're meant to represent the outside view. The way this outside view is determined, you can read about in the background information, but you don't need to. You can just look at them and decide using your own inside view how you might want to change it. But particularly if you want to think about whether you agree with this outside view, if you take a different perspective on what the starting point should be. Let's go ahead and see how these components work. So we can click and drag any year. We don't need to do all of them to set up a distribution across the set because they move in a sensible automatic way to interpolate. And yeah, you could simply move this to 50%. You think it's a coin flip by the end of 2036, submit. If it doesn't happen in all of this time, you would win. You'd be continuously winning points because you thought it was less likely than the starting probabilities, and that difference of opinion would be recognized. Anyway, let's fix 2027 in place. And let's say you think 7% is way too high for 2026. You'll set it to 0.3%. And again, that's fine. You can just submit that. Let's say you have... So you think that because there are all these purges in the PLA at the moment, and it'd be very unlikely they would turn around that quickly. Xi Jinping isn't very happy with the progress with the modernization. So it probably means they're behind, and this centenary goal, from our perspective, as we're filling this out, is looking a bit less likely. So then let's consider 2028. We can be very specific. I'll explain the advantages of being specific on a more granular level, but it's not more important than the big picture. On a lot of platforms, getting the detail right, knowing exactly the year or exactly the month or the day, that's all that's counted. If you don't get the specifics right, to the granularity of the market, then you lose out. That's not the case here. If you just focus on the big picture, if you're accurate, you get points. But anyway, there are still some advantages to specifying exactly how you expect these probabilities to change over the course of the year. I'll explain that a bit later. So it's 15% by the end of spring, and then it increases to 18% by the end of November. You get very slightly more points for getting this right, but the reason why you do this is because of this auto decay button. And I'd recommend keeping this one ticked on. It means that even though you've put 18% chance of this happening by the end of November 2028, if we suddenly find ourselves in October 2028 and it hasn't happened, you probably aren't still putting 18% on it by that year. And instead of having to log in and constantly revise your probabilities down when something doesn't happen, despite this being completely, because this is completely specified and that update is entirely predictable, it just does it for you. So when we get to October, this probability and the starting probabilities will both be reduced to what you would expect. You can look at the details of the calculation in the FAQ. It's very brief. It's just a conditional probability. There's also this auto remake button. You don't need to worry about this. Just I would recommend keeping it off. There's an explanation there on the screen for what it does. But leaving these as the default is what I would recommend. And then we'll submit that. So for 2028 at least, we think it's less likely than starting probabilities, but we've got these step ups in the periods of time. You can also look at all the months together. You don't have to go month by month by month. You can edit everything from over this full 10-year period, which I think is quite nice. So anyway, and you can see these black ones. These fix it in place so they don't get dragged up. That's the point of that. If you want to, you say, I think this is 45%. I want it to stay there. So then you can move other things around without affecting it. You can unfix them by pressing the squares here. If you want to unselect all of them, you can toggle to fix all of them, turn them all off, and then as soon as I ping one of these, it's going to be back to a smooth interpolation state. Quickly, we can look at the points. Here, you've basically said this is less likely than the starting probabilities, and you can say, okay, but what if it does happen by the end of 2032? And you can see, yeah, you've won points for everything before that point, and you lose points for everything after, which makes sense. But overall, you've won points in this scenario because you said it wouldn't happen for lots of the time where it didn't happen. And then you can see you win fewer points for these later ones because you didn't bet it. You haven't actually moved the probability down that much. We can also look at this on a year-by-year view. I've reset everything now. Let's say we've changed our mind and we think it's more likely than starting probabilities. So I've moved it up. In this case, we lose more as time goes on if it doesn't happen. But let's say it does happen. Let's say it happens 2029, at some point in 2029. So it's not exactly clear how much we win then. We win more for these later years because sooner you provide a view on a question, the more helpful that is. So you get more points as a result. There's more liquidity was the key concept behind this. So if we do a sort of a similar move, if we go from 65 to 70, this takes 20 points to move the probabilities in this way. And maybe we're winning 10 points, maybe we're losing 20 points, or everything we've invested. In the more near-term markets, 20 points here goes a long way. We're going from 20% to 65%. That's because the more you can stake, the more you can win, and we pay out more for the more prescient you are. If you can say true things 10 years ahead of time, you get rewarded. Oh, and the last thing to do, of course, is as it's a collaborative platform, it's to leave a comment. So you've read this article that you find very useful and very unlikely in the next couple of years. And you can add a nice link. And then Alice, who's logged in, has this market open. They're looking at it and considering it, and they see there's a new comment. And they think this is a good contribution to the conversation, so they upvote it. And they also they want to share this their thinking on the seasonality of such events, kind of March to May and September, October. Worth watching this video of the amphibious vehicle to realize how bad rough seas will be. And they can link to that video. And maybe can put an image in. You can also put in charts and tables with data wrapper if you wish to format everything very nicely. You can also just screenshot things. And so Alice replies, and Bob, also still on this page, can see this new reply and quickly can open it without having to reload or anything. And they think it's a good contribution, but also useful, and maybe this is what informs them to change their month-by-month view. And so of their weekly tipping budget of 10, they decided to tip 2 points to Alice. It was valuable, it changed their mind. Whatever you decide is worthy of tips is down to you. And yeah, and the only thing to say about this is Obviously this is a very long-term date market, but these can also be done for very short-term ones. I've tested it where rather than being month by month, these are all minutes and they decay away. So we can do very short-term ones, and the comments are designed to allow for live discussion. You don't need to reload to see how the conversation's progressed. You can just do it live. Good, so that covers the basics. The next thing to look at is this markets page. So as I said, you're able to stake more and therefore get rewarded more for dates far in the future. The differences in liquidity are also present between questions. Some questions might be more valuable than others, and so you can organize by liquidity. You can also organize by the liquidity loss. So while the China-Taiwan one might have the most liquidity across the full range, maybe the England local elections deserve your focus more, because more liquidity is lost in the coming day, and that's because the local elections are in May. Therefore, the liquidity that's available for it is disappearing faster. But before we get to that, let's I'll also show you this nuclear detonation one. Get rid of my draft probabilities there. So this is just like before, but these are independent. We're not looking at a cumulative risk over 10 years. We're just looking at the probabilities per year, and we can adjust each month by month in just the same way. So these are the base rates. Maybe you think it's more likely because you believe North Korea's testing facilities will be up and running again. There's background information for where these base rates came from. And let's move on away from dates, and we will look instead at what some value might be into the future. So here we have Europe's best chance of a tech giant, and we're forecasting its annual revenue. This might look like the uncertainty isn't expanding that greatly, given that this is over 10 years. It's quite hard to forecast things ahead that far. But this is actually on a logarithmic scale. If you don't like that, and by logarithm, it's logarithm base 1.1. So this would be on a base 10 plot. If this doesn't mean anything to you, that's absolutely fine. The defaults are based on how the market's set up, but you can just plot things in a linear way, so you can see, the uncertainty bands are increasing. So anyway, let me explain this plot. These are essentially the confidence intervals for each year. The blue line being the median line, and the dark grey is the 50th percentile region, and the light grey is the 90th percentile region, going from the 5th to the 95th. And again, we've got background information on which reference classes were used, and we used partial pooling to balance the contribution of the different reference classes, whether it's Nebius's growth itself or its sector, or just companies in general. And that's used to create this outside view starting distribution. So let's look at 2026. And this is what we would call an exceedance plot, I suppose. So when we hover over, we can see there's this bar is on the probability of it being over $500 million this year, and this is the probability of it being over $14 billion this year. And we don't really want to have to do all of these individually, but let's say earning over, if we think $1 billion is basically guaranteed, it's not 5% chance of it being less, it's like 1% chance of it being less, and therefore 99% chance of being more. But let's say 5 billion, that's a bit excessive. We think let's say it's 1% chance. And then we can look for our median. Let's say we think it's going to grow more than the outside view would suggest. 50% chance it's above 2.5 billion. 50% chance it's less. And that's basically all we need to make our probability distribution in the form of this exceedance chart, or whatever you want to call it. So we're not just looking at one arbitrary threshold, we're able to forecast all of them at once. Again, we have a point chart here, so if it lands, let's say it lands between, the final value is just over 2 billion, but not above 2.1. We've said it will be higher than all of these, so we win some points there. We did think it would be a bit higher than the starting probabilities here, so we lose some there. But we did think these tail values were unlikely. Overall, we win about a point in this case. Of course, if we can be accurate even further ahead, that would be great. So again, let's say we're quite bullish. 95% chance they'll be approaching 5 billion in 2029. And let's say everything looks right, 55% for over 15 billion per year. We can just submit that. That's all it really takes. So we have our 2026, we have our 2029. These are still at the starting probabilities, but we don't have to manually fill those in. We can just press this interpolate button, and that shifts everything up accordingly. So it gives us more weight on the values, but it's also anchoring to our 2026 plot, which put less on these higher values. It's just a nice straightforward interpolation. If you end up not liking this one, you can reset it, and we can see how this looks. And yeah, we can submit that. Anyway, it's all designed to be straightforward. You can be as specific as you like, and you can shift a lot of sub-markets, a lot of probabilities all at once. Just briefly, we have a more complex point chart here. You can essentially look at hypothetical resolution values all the way across. So if it does end up being very high towards the latter end, you can see how your predictions fare in that scenario. Or if they drop out massively, how much do you lose? So you can interactively sort of paint a scenario, and you can see you would lose 35 points in this one. So this is how we predict values. And now we'll go on to the third and final market type. And this is essentially the same, but we have non-independent categories. So the local elections in England are in May. And it's the same thing. We have another exceedance chart. We're being asked to predict the number of councillor seats that Labour will win. And maybe we think, again, there's background information. It takes into account the typical swing you would see with polling numbers as they are, I believe. I might upload more information on this, as this is it's a brief summary. I'll try and make sure that the Python script that was used to generate the probabilities is available for you or your AI agent to have a look at and potentially customize if that's how you want to go about your forecasting. But there is no need to if you don't want to. But the difficulty with these kind of forecasting questions on other platforms is that, I might be saying, actually, I think Labour's going to do less well here. Someone has to win these seats that Labour isn't. And let's say I think it's going to be split between Greens and Reform for the most part. Submit that. We can see there are 110 missing seats. I can lift these probabilities up. Maybe I think that's sort of a hard stop at around 2,300. I mean, that's nearly half. So we're looking at probably already shifting a lot from the historical norm. We have that as the uptick for Green, but it's basically impossible to actually account for exactly, the expected total number of seats are, and that's what the UI does for you. So in fact, we have extra seats because I gave too many to Green. Let's say the Conservatives are not going to do as well as normal. We can just remove the remainder. Let's say we don't think the Liberal Democrats aren't going to do as well as the outside view would suggest. Then this creates 65 seats that are unassigned, and we can, if we wish, we can just assign that all to a reform if we think they're going to do well. For those that are interested, I will explain why things are set up this way and how it compares to other platforms. But you have everything you need to know to get started, so you can stop watching here. And for those interested, I'll explain a bit about why it's designed this way, starting with why do we use these cumulative probabilities? Why do we have an exceedance plot? So if we look at Metaculus as a forecasting platform that has one of the more intuitive and information-rich ways of supplying a forecast, a distribution on when an event might take place. On this question, maybe I'll believe with 80% confidence that this happens before April 2033, while the community thinks there's just a 30% chance of this happening. If it ends up being the case that it happens a bit later, say September 2034, despite the community thinking this is very early and me thinking that September 2034, there's a 90% chance of that happening, I actually lose out. The community would perform better than me because they put more weight on it happening specifically on September 2034, even though I had this view, this many years in advance in 2026, that it was much more likely than that. In my view, knowing whether it happens or not is the main thing. So if I thought there was an 87% chance of China taking this major military action by the end of 2036, then even if I thought that it's more likely to happen by 2032, and every year from there I don't update that much, I should still get some recognition for the fact that that I thought it was very likely to happen by this date. If we were inputting this on Metaculus, I would not have that much weight on 2036 itself, and if it happened, I'd probably be losing points, even though, as far as I'm concerned, this would be a very prescient perspective on matters. The other reason things are designed as they are is that there's very information dense. We can grade all of these over time. As each month passes, we can see if it happened or not. We're not just looking at one event and grading a curve based on that one event happening or not, taking a lot of data points over time. And so if you are generally an accurate forecaster, you can prove yourself fairly quickly. Whereas often on these forecasting platforms, they have to put up lots of questions which they don't necessarily care about, which ends up wasting everyone's time doing questions that aren't of interest. And that's just to get around the fact that when you only have a couple of questions, you might as well just put 1% or 99% and hope that it goes in your direction and not the other. And then you have a good chance of being at the top of the leaderboard in these competitive forecasting competitions, which obviously distorts what the true probability is, and makes it look like you're a very good forecaster when you just got lucky. And so to get around that, the platforms have to put in lots and lots of questions so that logically it doesn't make sense to put these extreme probabilities in, and instead to put closer to your true probabilities in at least. And then you have to divide your attention across all these different markets, and probably do a less good job on all of them as a result. Because you don't score points based off of how you do relative to others, it's instead how well you did relative to the starting probabilities. You don't have this effect. You get rewarded based on your accuracy and not your relative accuracy. The other benefit of the higher information density of anti-static is that you don't need to come in and manually decay your forecasts as things don't happen, as I mentioned earlier. An example of a question on manifold markets is this one by Isaac. And in this case, events happened in Iran that caused people to bet this probability up. And that's the sort of thing, this is what causes people to engage with these platforms, and they've got new information about the world and they arrive. Often you'll do better by doing the opposite, coming to the platforms when nothing is happening and instead betting things down. This current 13%, by the time we get to the end of the year, If it hasn't happened, it will be much lower, and it will converge to 0%, as there's very little time for it to happen. And currently, you would just have to keep coming back and betting the market down and down and down, even if you thought initially that maybe it's something like 20%. But if you bet 20% here, if you're not the one to sell off, then others will bet it down, even if your view is perfectly accurate. The other thing you'll notice here is you have some chaos, someone betting up to about 45%. The nature of prediction markets is that you can often get rewarded not for predictive accuracy, but simply for correcting other people's mistakes. You could, if you were on the platform as this was bet up, you could bet it all the way back down. And if you did that across lots of markets, you would probably be one of the top scorers of the month. The other thing that becomes obvious when you work in professional forecasting teams is that it's great to have experts and people with specialisms, but because of the competitive arrangement of the platforms, they have to put up lots of questions, as previously mentioned. And so if you have a lot of knowledge on, let's say, Azerbaijani politics, there's really little point you getting involved because there's only one question for you to get involved with at best, and it won't count for much. To get a good track record, you have to do it across lots and lots of questions. When you go to, say, Good Judgment Open and there's an Azerbaijan question, even if the people who've asked this question value it very strongly and would like valuable insights, both in terms of the forecast and also the comments left, your contribution would not count for much on Good Judgment Open. You would have to learn about 49 other questions and contribute wise forecasts on those as well. In the case of prediction markets, this is not the case. If there's a question that you have a strong view on, let's say whether they will publicly announce or acknowledge that its military forces have attempted to strike Iran, you might have wise things to say. And if there's a betting market or prediction market on this, then you could win a lot of money with your informed view. But the nature of these betting markets is the ones with liquidity are the ones that are most entertaining. If there was a question on Azerbaijani military strikes on Polymarket, then it probably wouldn't even have very much interest. Because those that enjoy betting probably want to do stuff that doesn't require extensive research. It's probably something that they know about or enjoy following to begin with. And the smart money on betting sites, they will go to where the dumb money is. That's where they can win more. Whereas if the Azerbaijani military market is only filled with experts and has very little liquidity because they're only willing to bet a few $1,000s, then they probably won't get involved. So there's little money to be gained for the experts, and the final probability is likely to be way off the true probability, simply because there are fewer market participants and less money to win and less incentive to get it right. It's the same case here. We have lots of stuff on football and Eurovision, and it's a shame because there are important questions about the future that could inform decision makers. There are, of course, some geopolitical markets on Polymarket. One of the clear downsides of getting involved with betting markets is that you have to think about how much money to put down, what percentage of your bankroll to put down on different bets. And of course, if you might be an expert on the Fordo nuclear facility, but betting $200 on it is not going to move the price that much, and you're very unlikely to get involved with the comment section on Polymarket, particularly because helping other people do well is only going to reduce the payout you get. If you correct the price by persuading others to correct the price, that's less money for you. And Polymarket comments aren't known for their insight, which is a shame because there are a lot of talented participants in these markets, and we know from the Good Judgment Project getting super forecasters to team up and collaborate results in much greater accuracy together. And that is the goal of Antistatic, is to provide the same experience as being on one of these professional forecasting teams. I've put in some nice quality of life features, like being able to type in a probability and then tab along So then I'll tab to 3.25, make that 90, and so on. And you can shift tab to go back, that sort of thing. And then for comments, you can press Command Enter to send the comment. If you would like any features added, or if you spot any bugs, since this platform is only a week old as of the uploading of this video, then if you could go to the form at the bottom of the About page, or the form on the front page for an issue, that would be very helpful. But other than that, you have everything you need to get stuck in. Forecasting is a fun game when the rules are set up well, and the side effect is that people get to understand the future more clearly. It's also a skill that benefits from deliberate practice and others around you that you can learn from. So please make forecasts and request any markets that you would value some insight and foresight on, and I'll see you on antistatic.exchange.